All right, everyone, let's jump right in. Today, we are getting into one of the absolute masterpieces of the short story form, Anton Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog. Now, on the surface, you might think it's just a simple story about an affair, but trust me, it's so much more than that. It's really about that shocking moment when real life finally kips in, long after you thought your life was already, figured out. To really get this story, we've got to start with this quote from Chekhov himself. This is the key that unlocks everything. He's telling us right from the get-go, hey, don't focus on the romance. The real story here is the shock of waking up, of realizing you've been sleepwalking through your own life.
So just so you know where we're pulling this analysis from, it's a pretty unique source. Imagine this, an imaginary conversation, a kind of round table, between Chekhov himself and a bunch of literary heavy hitters like Virginia Woolf and James Wood. It's a really cool way to get right into the thick of the story's big, complicated questions.
Okay, section 1, a love that arrives late. This gets right to the core problem of the story, right? What do you do? What happens when this incredibly powerful, genuine feeling just shows up way too late? After your life is already built, the marriage, the job, the whole structure is set in stone. And Chekhov himself, in his own words, makes it super clear that he's not interested in drawing simple moral lines. He's fascinated by that messy, uncomfortable space between the life we're supposed to be living, the one we perform for everyone, and the one we actually feel on the inside. This story lives and breathes in that gap. And that's why there are no easy heroes or villains here. So here's the big takeaway, and it's a big one. This isn't one of those stories where love comes along and redeems everyone. No way. In fact, it does the exact opposite. Love doesn't save Gurov and Anna. It just complicates them. It completely shatters the comfortable lives they've been living and forces them to face a kind of raw honesty that, frankly, they have no idea how to deal with. All right, on to our second section, the awakening from habit. This is where we really zoom in on Gurov, the main character. His whole journey from this kind of cynical, habitual womanizer is the engine of the story. But here's the question that critics all wrestle with. Is he actually falling in love? Or is something even bigger happening? Is he just becoming a conscious human being for the very first time? And you can really see that shift laid out here. On one side, you've got his old life, his habitual cynicism. It was all a performance, right? A comfortable layer of irony that acted like armor, protecting him from feeling anything too deeply. But on the other side, you get this genuine feeling. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't feel good. It's destabilizing. It makes him restless. It's like all his defenses have just vanished.
The critic James Wood has such a brilliant take on this. He says that for Gurov, this whole thing isn't some grand romantic elevation. It's not a step up. It's a loss of insulation. It's way simpler and way more profound than that. It's just his old cynical act, his whole routine, it just stops working. The shield he's been carrying his whole life just shatters.
And building right on that, another great critic, Lionel Trilling, has a phrase for it that just gives me chills: moral exposure. Just think about that for a second. This isn't about Gurov finding happiness or fulfillment. It's about him being completely stripped bare, forced to look at himself honestly for the first time after a lifetime of just performance. That's not romantic. That's terrifying. And that's exactly why Gurov's change feels so incredibly real, right? It's not some sweet, simple fantasy. It's hard. It's messy. It's inconvenient. It comes with this massive weight of responsibility. And the genius of Chekhov is that he offers Gurov absolutely no promise of a happy ending to make it all worthwhile. Okay, let's move on. Section 3, truth without permission. Now we're going to shift our focus over to Anna. It's so easy to see her as just fragile, consumed by guilt. But the critics we're looking at push for a totally different reading. They see in her this incredible courage of emotional honesty, a quiet battle between her own truth and the rigid society she's trapped in. So, yeah, on the surface, what do we see? We see guilt and anxiety, right? We see a fear of being judged. But if you look just a little bit closer, you see her quiet strength. That guilt, well, that's actually a sign of her deep moral sensitivity. That anxiety, that's just a perfectly realistic response to her situation. And her real strength, the thing that makes her so compelling, is this stubborn refusal to lie to herself about what she's feeling. And Virginia Woolf just hits the nail on the head when she points out the key difference in their timing. She says, Anna feels first, Gurov understands later. I mean, how perfect is that? Anna gets the seriousness of it all immediately. She feels the full weight of it from the jump.
while Gurov is still playing his cynical games. In a way, she's miles ahead of him, both emotionally and morally. This really gets to the genius of Chekhov's whole approach. He never takes sides. He never wags a finger and tells us who's right or who's wrong. Instead, he just drops us, the readers, right into the middle of this impossible car crash of legitimate claims. You've got the claim of love, but also the claim of loyalty, the demand for personal honesty, but also the pressure of social stability. He just forces us to sit with that tension and doesn't give us an easy way out.
So that brings us to our fourth point, the quiet pain of secrecy. Think about it. Their entire relationship has to exist in the shadows, and Chekhov shows us something profound about what that actually does to a person. It's not romantic or thrilling. It's something else entirely. It's just work. It becomes this draining, mundane labor that slowly grinds them down. You know, in most stories, a secret affair is portrayed as this dramatic, passionate escape from a boring life. It's exciting. But Chekhov gives us the cold, hard reality. It's not thrilling, it's tiring. It's not an escape, it's an exhausting second job. That secrecy doesn't add excitement, it just quietly eats away at the very love it's supposed to be protecting. And you can almost see it happening in these quiet steps. First, what started as their little sanctuary, those hotel rooms, starts to feel like a cage. That protection becomes confinement. Then the constant vigilance, always looking over their shoulder, that's not a thrill, it's just exhausting labor. And finally, living this double life doesn't destroy their love with some big dramatic fight. It just wears it down. It exhausts the feeling. One lie, one secret meeting at a time. And that's what makes this so powerful, isn't it? It feels so real. Chekhov deliberately avoids the melodrama because he understood something fundamental about being human, that the deepest suffering isn't always loud and dramatic. A lot of the time, it's quiet. It feels like a dull ache, a fatigue you can't shake. It's the lack of drama that makes their pain so incredibly unsettling. And all of this leads us to the story's ending, or lack of one, which brings us to our final section, an ending without answers. This is probably the most famous and, for its time, radical thing about the story. Chekhov just stops. He stops the story right at the very moment Gurov and Anna finally grasp the true scale of their problem, and he gives them no solution. Why? Well, because that ambiguity, that lack of an answer, that is the point. There's a great critic, Gary Saul Morson, who explains Chekhov's thinking perfectly. He says that for Chekhov, tying everything up in a neat little bow would have felt like a lie. Real life just doesn't work that way. It doesn't give us clean resolutions. So Chekhov cuts the story off right at the moment the real difficulty, the hard work of actually living with this truth, begins. So what does that do? It turns the final question back on us, the readers. After everything they've been through, what are we supposed to make of it? Is The Lady with the Dog ultimately a hopeful story? Or is it a tragedy? And there are really strong arguments for both sides. I mean, from the tragic point of view, loss is just baked into their situation. There's no way out where everyone wins. Their love hasn't erased their other obligations. But then there's the hopeful view. And this view says the awakening itself is the win. Sure, they might not end up happy, but at least they've stopped deceiving themselves. And maybe that sincerity, maybe that's its own kind of salvation. But in the end, Chekhov's final word on it all brings us to this unsettling clarity. What matters, he seems to say, isn't what they do next. It's what has already happened to them, inside. They now see themselves and their lives clearly. The rehearsal is over. For better or for worse, the real show has finally begun. And the story just leaves us there, to sit with that one huge unanswered question. How much is that kind of clarity really worth?